Hello and thanks for joining us on Daily Politics. On this program, we discuss issues around politics, policy and governance. I am Shafiu Suleiman. Now, as the current cost of living crisis and rampaging hunger, especially amongst the most vulnerable in the country, continue unabated, authorities at both national and subnational levels have continued to shift blames over who is responsible for the situation Nigerians found themselves. While governors, especially of the opposition PDP, are calling on President Bola Tinubu to throw in the towel if he cannot find solution to the lingering economic crisis, the ruling party and its government are calling out the opposition governors for not doing their part in dealing with the situation. On the other hand, some hangers-on at the villa and a pan-Yoruba group, the Afenifere, are quick to point accusing fingers on the immediate past government of President Muhammadu Buhari for the current economic challenges facing the country in their bid to exonerate the incumbent government of President Bola Tinubu. Now, in the ensuing blame game, Nigerians who are bearing the brunt have been looking up to those entrusted with leadership at both levels to end the politicization, regionalization, or ethnicization of the economic crisis, putting the citizens on the edge and come together to salvage the country from going under. It is against this backdrop we'll be engaging our former Minister of Sports and Youth Development, Barrister Solomon Dalong, to examine the blame game and the need for collective efforts to address the challenge. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Viewers, we take a short break, and when we return, the conversation commences. Stay with us. Thank you very much for staying with us on Daily Politics. And now the conversation begins. Barrister, a former minister, you happen to be also one of those that have been very critical, of people in authorities when things go wrong. How do you feel? How are you facing the current economic realities in the country? Does it really affect you?
Directly and indirectly.
Okay.
Directly because, of course, I go to the market just like every Nigerian. So I am confronted with the high cost of living, the foodstuff. Indirectly is the fact that, those who relied on us for leadership expect us, to lean our voices to their current predicaments of hunger and poverty. And they also will want us to demonstrate leadership by making provision to cushion the effect of the hardship. So the burden is even more heavier on me as a person than
the ordinary person.
Yes, the ordinary person.
Okay, now let's look at the situation now. We find ourselves as a country. We are really at a crossroads, some will say, looking at the economic indices, the poor living condition Nigerians are in. And then some are quick to ask, was it by accident that we get here, or it was by design?
I think it wasn't by accident, but it was more or less leadership recklessness. Because what brought us here was the single statement that subsidy is gone. And the president who made that statement had also been in the position to advise a president, former President Goodluck Jonathan, on the 17th of January 2014, where he wrote him an extensive letter enumerating the consequences of withdrawal of subsidy. So he is more or less, I'm an informed person on this subject matter.
Right.
So for him to have toe this line without necessarily putting the necessary mechanism to cushion the effect cannot be an accident. It is more or less a not well thought of policy. that the president embarked upon.
Even though some will say, at the time he made a statement or he took the decision, to announce that the subsidy has gone, he has no option than to do that. Subsidy was not provided for in the budget. That's one. And then two, at the same time, there was also a sort of consensus among the political elites and other key players in the economy that this subsidy has to go. Isn't it timely for him to take such a decision?
He had an option, and the option was the 1 month grace provided for by former President Muhammadu Buhari, who knew that he would require that particular grace to consult broadly with relevant stakeholders as to how he will develop mechanism of shock absorber policies on the ground to cushion off the effect. So it was not a decision that he was just caught up with. No. The 1 month grace which subsidy existed from May to June 2023 was enough for him. So for him to have abandoned that grace and strike a match at the filling station without even knowing where firefighting equipment will be bought was one of the most reckless policy or decision any government will ever want to embark upon.
Right. Okay, there was some sort of ovation, at the beginning. A number of people hailed that decision. Some say he is a bold president. He is one who, sort of hit the ground running by taking the bold step, the bold step now to end the subsidy regime, and then came up with also another key policy of harmonizing the exchange rate, which has also been an issue. But then, in the long run, now that Nigeria is at this crossroad and everyone, seems to be running helter-skelter for solution, some voices are beginning to shift the blame. Okay, this was not our making. The previous government failed to do this, X, Y, Z, and that's why we are here. Do you subscribing to this idea? Even though I know you were part of the government at some point.
No, those who were hailing the president when he took this faulty decision were people who were behaving like what my father told me, that when people want to destroy you, they move you close to your grave and start singing praises so that you can easily jump into it. So those who were ovating him for courage were not actually genuine lovers, because a great warrior does not use harmattan to fight an armless civilian. So that is the equivalent of what the president has done. It's not courage. It's cowardice of the highest order, because he took a decision against the interests of common people who have been losing their lives because of it. Now,
but the ultimate objective was that the economy will boom, after all of that. And it will come back it will rebound, and it will come back to be on its footing, so that Nigeria will have a progressive kind of trajectory.
We will get back to that. But the point I am trying to make is that if the president had consulted broadly, has also engaged stakeholders, because at the time he announced this policy, he was the only person in government and his vice. There were even no special advisors. There were even no anybody to have helped him. And the president himself did not have a transition committee. He only had the government transition committee, which was more or less supposed to compile inventory of government properties and hand over to him. So he had next to nothing of the knowledge of the situation on ground, apart from the security reports he was being given. Now, as to whether at the long run this decision will yield positive results, there is even no political will to drive the process to take us to that country.
Why did you say so?
Yielding the political dividend. Because look at the formation of the government of Mr. President. A jumbo-sized cabinet, one of the highest in the history of Nigeria, 50 ministers, when even you are supposed to have cut costs. When we were ministers, Buhari only approved 2 aides for us, a special assistant media and a personal assistant. These current ministers had 13 aides approved for them.
Each of them?
Each of them. So you multiply 13 by 50, you will know what will happen to the modest dividend of the withdrawal of subsidy. It's just going to be consumed by the cost of governance. So would this put together and then looking at how even the government had been managing the meager resources of the country, especially 500 billion was borrowed by the president and it was not invested in any of this adventure that could yield dividends. Rather, it was shared between the 3 arms of government. So there is no political will, as I will sincerely say that.
We're talking about borrowing, you know. Some say what brought the country into this quagmire was actually the way and manner the previous government, you know, which you happen to be part of at some point, you know, was borrowing. The huge amount of the trillions of naira that were borrowed by the Buhari administration, you know, had consumed, you know, the lean resources the country has, and then even payment at some point became payment of what do you call it? The interest rate, you know. The interest of the borrowings became very difficult. So it got to a stage that situation has put the incumbent government on the edge. And also talking about, you know, today what we are facing, you know, the issue of hunger. Some people within the government are saying that it started from the previous administration. It didn't do well in managing, you know, because there were red flags that Nigeria could go into this mess. And so nobody did anything until we are here.
You see, but there is nothing wrong with borrowing because even America itself is one of the highest debtor nation in the world. But what is bad with borrowing is how it is invested. And unfortunately, the huge borrowings of Buhari's government was not properly invested. It was squandered and mismanaged. That is very, very unfortunate and highly condemnable. And we've been saying this, we are part of that government. We campaign and mobilize Nigerians to believe in APC. We cannot exonerate ourselves, but that we did not do what is right does not prevent us to be saying it till we go to address. So
when you said it is squandered, are you saying that there's nothing to show for it? But the government has been talking about a number of investments in infrastructure, in rail development and all of that.
All those ones are imaginary. They are just statements of the government to try to account for the huge borrowings. Because when you talk about infrastructure, can you name them? If you're talking about roads infrastructure, all of them in 8 years were uncompleted. I mean, we inherited Abuja, Kaduna Kano Road. In 2023, it is still uncompleted. So these ones are just mere political gimmicks or rhetorics to try to explain failures, which I am not part of it. But coming to now this issue of the blame game where you have ethnic champions, you have religious bigots, you have...
We'll take them one after the other. But we're trying to establish, you know, what happened from the previous administration to the present administration. We'll talk substantially about where we are here as a result of decision making. But we're also looking back at the previous administration, what it did right and what it did wrong. Here you are talking about the squandering of the resources, which some would say, can be established, looking at even the amount of money that is being investigated in the hands of ministers. At the last count, about 8 ministers are currently facing EFCC. We've had issues around, talking about the CBN and the scandals there. So perhaps that could be established. But beyond this, how was the previous administration managing the current crisis we're in terms of the exchange rate and in terms of the hardship that we're facing?
Well, you see, this issue of debt, for anybody who was in government with us from 2015 to 2019, it was more or less a real battle with, between patriotic forces and those capitalist theoreticians who believe in borrowing, that the spending cannot be justified. So we kept having that battle with them opposing. But of course, in a cabinet system where you have lost your voice of opposition, you are bound by the decision taken. That is why we cannot exonerate ourselves from it. But we were alarmed by the level with which we were borrowing, and there was no commensurate investment to justify it. Before we left cabinet in March 2023, I had a course in council to ask the president that can we show justification for the billions of naira we appropriated.
You mean March 2019?
2019.
That's right.
We appropriated in the Ministry of Works, Power and Housing. And then the millions of dollars we did weekly. And that there was nothing to show for it. As at that time, we had not even commissioned a 10-kilometer road. So where went all these appropriation? And then the president said, well, the minister should explain. And the minister took us into a comedy of language and English. And at the end of the day, the president said, I am not satisfied. But yet he even returned him as a minister. So these things, the signs were there. But I do not think that it is solely responsible for where we are today. Because, where we are today is as a result of something that was introduced without commensurate protection. So when you embark on such decision, you definitely have to pay the price, and that is what we are today. The government is now trying to see how they will respond. Instead of planning before acting, they act before planning.
Yeah, looking at the indices, for instance, today the rising, the hyperinflation the country is witnessing has substantially reduced purchasing power, has substantially also led to loss of jobs. Companies are folding up in numbers and so on. But even with the mismanagement, the alleged, squandering, as you rightly said, in the previous administration, it was able to keep the exchange rate at some level of check. At that point, you're talking about 500 to $1 or so, and here we are with 1,500 to $1. In a government that has promised Nigerians renewed hope, what went wrong? Was it that there was no concrete capacity or, to deal with the situation on ground? Or is it that the government has been over-exaggerated?
President Buhari's government stimulated certain productive sectors of the economy, like agriculture and mining. We also worked on stability in the oil region. Now, this contributed in supporting the local currency in the international market, because we were exporting some agricultural products. We were also collecting royalties from mining and also the petroleum. So this actually contributed.
Now, to support the naira.
To support the naira. This government while coming on board, would have improved on this by ensuring that the issue of insecurity, which has narrowed the space of agricultural production, they would have embarked on widening the scope so that you can now have large-scale agricultural production, which will now boost the economy. And then they would have looked at the manufacturing sector and also encouraged, because the Buhari's administration had a policy of first right of refusal to innocent before, before any other company. So when you bring a memo to the council about the purchase of vehicles, you must show enough reason that innocent had rejected or cannot provide, and that is why you are going elsewhere.
By way of supporting the local industries.
So that also supported the Naira. But this administration abandoned it and then embarked on the floating of the Naira, again, without looking at these issues. So what we ended up having the Naira going to a battle like a soldier who was naked, has no arm, but fighting a sophisticated army.
But the concern then was that, yes, you didn't float the Naira, that is the previous administration, you have provided some level of support, but then it wasn't done the right way. Some people were given, the opportunity to become billionaires, overnight, as against, supporting, the real sectors that require this foreign exchange and so on. How true was that?
Well, that is corruption. And the central bank was notorious for it because these stories were well known within government circles, even when we were in government, as to how people were befriending the governor of central bank to be getting weekly allocation of hard currency,
Forex,
yes, Forex, and then taking some to the black markets. That is corruption, and it has to be dealt with as corruption, investigated just like the special investigator is doing, and anybody who has anything to do with it should be punished. But again, the credentials and capacity of this government to deal with corruption is still suspicious, because they have not demonstrated that capacity to deal with this corruption. I mean, there are people that their names are already mentioned with documents all over about corruption, but they are still enjoying the privileges
even
of
though
government.
there's some level of deterrence, some would say. At some point when a minister and head of an agency were found wanting, they were suspended. Even though that, Nigerians are still also waiting to see what outcome will that bring. But that wasn't the situation. That wasn't the experience during the past regime. A number of government officials were alleged to have been involved in corruption scandals, but there wasn't deterrence. There wasn't any, any punishment, so to speak.
Instead of deploying injustice to get justice, it is better for you to remain quiet like Buhari. Because this government has deployed mechanism of injustice, pretending to give us justice.
How?
3 armed robbers were arrested, and then the one who was found with gun was taken to police station, while 2 were still allowed to go about. There were big names mentioned with Dr. Edubeta. These big names are still going around. They have not been suspended. They have also not been investigated. But Dr. Edu was suspended. And what was even surprising about what the government did was that she has every privilege, according to her, withdrawn, including her villa pass. It was withdrawn immediately. She is still a minister, suspended. So she still has the right and privileges of
But did you think that would also jeopardize the investigation going on? Because if she's allowed perhaps access to the presidency and to the president and those that matters, perhaps she could be able to influence the investigation.
No, going into the villa does not mean she will see the president. I mean, the president is already successfully caged by the cabal. So he cannot...
You need to expatiate on that.
You have to understand how the villa is.
When you say
there are about 3 to 4 protocol checkpoints before you get to the president. And these are more or less infrastructure of preventing people from seeing the president. So it is not enough to have said that taking her villa pass was to prevent her from seeing the president. What of those who were mentioned? What of those who had approved for 3 billion to be used for mere consultancy of verifying 100 million names? Why are they still around? So the inability to suspend these 2 names that has been mentioned has left some of us to think that minorities are...
But they have a bill, they claim bill of health, At some point the president said, hey, leave my, my officer alone.
It's not for the president to say. It is for investigation to say. And this is why minorities in Nigeria are feeling insecure. Once any minority is involved in any wrongdoing, it is orchestrated and used in the name of deterrence. What of those big names? Why are they still around?
Okay, coming back to the kind of situation at hand, the rampaging hunger. It has been, just like you said earlier, sort of being politicized, as some would say. It has become a PDP, APC kind of affair, with the governors now asking the president to throw in the towel if he cannot, find solution. And then the government is also saying that, well, at the subnational levels, we've given you enough resources to provide palliatives. 5 billion naira, for instance, at some point, we're giving grains and all of that. And then they also have their responsibility to support local production in terms of the agricultural production now, which they are not also doing enough. That they should go back to the states and also do this. Maybe the aggregate outcome may take the country out of the situation.
It is irresponsibility for PDP governors to ask the president to resign. Because if the president resigns, will APC also resign? The policies on ground is an APC policy. So removing the president means anointing another active APC member to continue with these policies. After all, the president said, I'm going to continue where Buhari stopped. So that statement is reckless and irresponsible. The opposition should be more mature and responsible in terms of tackling this government. What they should be doing is not asking or politicization of this crisis. They should be providing alternative solutions superior to the incompetencies of this government so that Nigerians can trust them and know where to go in the next coming elections or any time there are opportunity to change leadership. But I disagree in total with their approach. What Nigerians should do is to go with the words of the president. The president during the inauguration said, do not pity me. I looked for the job and got it. So all these hired mercenaries trying to defend the president are hypocrites. The president has already
show capability and capacity.
He told Nigerians not to pity him. We should descend on him heavily because he looked for the job and got it. So what is Bayo Anonuga trying to tell us? What is Daniel Bola trying to tell us? Can they be more Catholic than the Pope?
Okay, talking about the fact that he has the capacity, he asked for it and is ready to face it. What do you make up with the intervention so far? Now the government, having met with several stakeholders, the Council of Economic Council, and so on and so forth, with the governors and so on, and then coming up with some quick fixes, so to speak, 42,000 metric tons, to be shared, as they said, free to the ordinary people, to those, the vulnerable, the most vulnerable. Would it solve the situation?
The president's competency is overrated by Nigerians. This method, the last strategy of tackling hunger and poverty will increase hunger and poverty.
How?
Because the history of distribution of grains in this country is that he is going to give this to governors. And the governors have a penchant. They have warehouses to hoard these things and wait for election.
But this time around, they're talking about engaging NEMA and other key players in that, in providing relief to the...
NEMA has been part of this ignoble distribution system. In fact, the mere fact that you call the name of NEMA now, many Nigerians had collapsed because they know how notorious NEMA is in diverting and hoarding.
Has it been found wanting? Anyway, when we come back, I understand we have to take a break. In case you're just joining us, the program is Daily Politics, and today we're looking at economic crisis in the country and, of course, examining the blame game among key actors in the policy and decision makers at national and subnationals and other regional groups, adding their voices. And we have been interfacing with Barrister Solomon Dalong, a former Minister of Sports and Youth Development. Together we'll be looking at the issues. When we return, the conversation continues. Stay with us. Thank you for joining us on Daily Politics. You can do well by also joining us across our social platforms and watch us live on YouTube. And back in the studio, Barrister Solomon Dalong. Before the break, you were talking about, alleging some level of culpability on the part of NEMA and the distribution of palliatives. Nigerians have been waiting to see all of these palliatives that the government has been announcing. Grains before the Christmas, at some point 5 billion naira to each state and all of that. And yet Nigerians are yet to see the impact.
The 5 billion naira had ended in the pockets of individuals because we have not seen it anywhere. I am a grassroots leader. I engage, I interface with the common people. I have not heard any of them saying he has been given a dime. As for the issue of the grains, they have all ended up in the stores of politicians who are waiting to use it for election.
In the face of this hunger?
Nigerian politicians, during COVID, Buhari released a lot of grains. And as people were dying for hunger, these things were hoarded until people deploy self-help to begin to sniff where these things are hoarded, to break it and have access to it all over the country. So it is not an allegation. These are known facts. Now, this NEMA we are talking about, when we were in office, Acting President Osibanjo approved 7 billion for the purchase of grains for the Northeast. We went for the commissioning in Maiduguri when the vice president was governor. We were expecting that, about that giant warehouse would be filled. All we saw was about 50 trucks. And that was what we commissioned. And that explained why the former NEMA boss was fired. So if you are going to use NEMA again this time, I wonder how many Nigerians, with just mentioning it, even me joining it now, would have already been instead of coma. There are better ways of handling this issue.
Okay, what are the better ways? Because all hands must be on deck. Nigerians are looking forward to solutions, critical solutions that would end this crisis or that would alleviate the sufferings of Nigeria. What are those channels?
The president, if he has the political will and is committed, should constitute a national grains distribution committee. Members of this committee should be reputable Nigerians, chosen from politics, the academia, traditional institution, religious organization, civil society, youth, and women. And they should be chosen from each of the local government. So if we make Shafiu a chairman of the Grains Distribution Committee of his local government, the people will now wait to see where he is going to take it to. Now that you have just been met, you don't even have the capacity to build a warehouse to store. But these people you are giving them had infrastructure of holding these things. So that is why nobody has ever heard of it. Nobody has seen it. So the method.
So you think it is a wrong decision to, I mean, or that's not the right.
Good decision, but with bad method of implementation.
Okay, now still talking about this blame games, I'm sure you must have had the comments made by, a spokesperson or so of the Afenifere, which is a Yoruba group, for the first time coming out in defense of the president, that Nigerians shouldn't blame the current government, if you like, of what is happening today. They should channel all the blames to the previous administration. I've had a former national chairman of the APC too, a former governor of Edo State, Adams Oshomole, saying the same thing. Before now, we've had the NSA talking about, alleging that the current government made almost an empty treasury, like it happened during the 2015 and so on. This blame continues. Why are leaders, always shy away from responsibilities and should blame where necessary?
A lazy workman blames his tools. This blame game, the regionalization of this blame game, the weaponization of this blame game, and the shifting, the trading of buck from one point to the other is just an uncharitable hypocrisy. Buhari can never be blamed for the current economic woes. Buhari knew the consequences of removing fuel subsidy. So in all his failures, which I have admitted, he made sure that he did not allow it escalate in his hands. So you cannot blame him. What took us to where we are today is not because of the debt burden. What took us to where we are today is not because they made empty treasury. What took us to where we are today is an economic policy that is inhumane, that set and escalated the economic situation, thereby unleashing hunger and poverty on the people. So the government should take full responsibility as a government that Nigerians elected, not to be blaming the Daura-born general who has retired to Daura and also reflecting on his inability to have delivered on his mandate. I think this is very, very unfair to that elder statesman.
But you're also talking about some policies that were being implemented to support, to manage the situation, for instance. And the current administration is also looking at revamping the agricultural sector now, but then in a different way. I know the Anko Borrower program has been suspended, perhaps at some point, due to the challenges encountered and so on. But some say it has substantially helped, in boosting agricultural production, especially rice production. And that was partly responsible for sustaining the situation before now. And today, even the pricing has gone, has hit the roof. How would you reconcile some of these arguments?
These arguments are mere rhetorics of overzealous mercenaries trying to court favor in government. When Buhari left on the 29th of May, the dollar was 700 naira. The dollar today is 1,005. Buhari left rice at 35,000 naira per bag. Rice today is about 100,000. Buhari left beans at about 28 or 29,000. Is also at 100,000. Buhari left transport fare from here to Jos at 500 naira. Today now is about 5,000. You cannot convince any rational mind that Buhari is responsible for what happened.
But you did also admit that the ground rule, if you like, the foundation was laid, back then.
Buhari himself inherited an empty treasury. I remember Buhari wanted to resign because I was a member of the transition committee that took over power. And when we briefed Buhari and informed him that he would require 7 trillion to form government, Buhari staggered and wanted to collapse. He took the intervention of people around him to support him, and he left for the hospital that night. So Buhari met the same situation, but Buhari worked harder than them, because within a year, we were able to move Nigeria out of recession and recorded 2.7% growth. So I think what this government needs to do.
What were the metrics? How are they different from the ones that are being deployed now?
Well, they are different because Buhari appointed only 36 ministers.
Cost of governance, is that one of it?
One of it. Buhari also reduced his salary and that of his vice.
Right.
Buhari also cut down this 200 billion that is improvised in the budget for the National Assembly for constituency project. Buhari cut that one down. Buhari also managed effectively foreign travels of ministers, because before you travel out of the country, you need his approval, and it was not that easy.
But he was among presidents that were accused of, moving out of the country, almost,
No, Buhari was guilty as an individual, but members of the government I'm referring to
were restricted.
Yes, I had no official car for 3.5 years. I didn't have I used my private car. There was no time in a year that the monthly overhead was up to 12 months. The highest we got was 6 months. So it was a trying period. But every member of that government, we convinced ourselves that we made a bad situation. Let us work harder to be able to salvage the situation.
So if I understand your position, instead of pushing the austerity measures to affect the people, like Nigerians are being told, to tighten their belts, to make sacrifices. During your time, you made the sacrifices instead of telling Nigerians to make sacrifices. Is that what happened?
Buhari used his official cars that he inherited from Jonathan for 4 years. In fact, he refused for tires to be changed until when we went to Kaduna, and I came down and I saw the president's car, one of the tires had worn out. And I asked the driver, why are you trying to kill the president? Why would you do this to us? And he said, who will go and tell the president to change the tires? That nobody can try that. He said, except you go and tell him. So I went to the president and confronted him and said, why are you not allowing them to change the tires? And the reply he gave me was that, had it deflected, why would I say they should change it? So I said, you mean it will now deflect on the highway and we put leaves behind the coat of arms to change the tire? That was when I pressurized him and they changed tires. That he did within the 4 years. So there were sacrifices within the first 4 years.
Okay. So if I understand, comparable to what is happening, obtainable today, there is a shift in terms of that mentality or that direction, because we are hearing about buying cars for, changing new cars and all of that. Perhaps that's where they're getting it wrong.
That is nothing from the body language of the president and his government to suggest that Nigerians deserve to sacrifice. The president has budgeted $6 billion to buy a yacht for himself. He has also budgeted about $1.8 billion in a supplementary budget to buy cars for his wife. There is $2 billion also in one of the supplementary budgets to buy vehicles for his office. He has budgeted about $4 billion to renovate Dodan Barracks. The National Assembly members have all gotten about 150 million to buy new cars.
And these cars perhaps are not made in Nigeria.
They are not. They have justified why they will not be made in Nigeria.
So when we're talking about strengthening the Naira, but at the same time, policymakers or those at the helm of are also weakening the Naira.
No, the bandits that had kidnapped the Naira are officials, government officials, not even the common people. The common people do not see the dollar, so they don't spend it. But those whose consumption, attitude, behavior depends solely on the dollar are those who had destroyed the Naira. So if the president is committed to what he's saying, let us see it from him. Let him be exemplary. There is an adage in Hausa. They told the dog that there is going to be celebrations in your house. And the dog
wants to see it on ground.
Yes, warned the person, don't give me announcement. When I see rice and bones on the ground, I will be the person to announce.
Now, talking about seeing it on ground, now that everyone has to join, in this crusade to get Nigerians out of this situation. The bottom line is Nigerians want to see food on the table, and everyone is running helter-skelter. And all directions people are suggesting, making the necessary recommendations and suggestions. In 1 minute, perhaps, because we're rounding up, what would you say, what is needed in terms of short-term, mid-term, and long-term strategies to end this hunger or alleviate the sufferings Nigerians are in?
Short-term, the president needs to crash the prices of fuel. He must introduce 50% fuel subsidy.
At the time, the IMF is saying they should jump it up?
To bring the prices of fuel down. He has to also crash the prices of foodstuff in the market in the interim.
Now, how would he do that? He has only 42,000 tons of grains. How would he crash it?
There are many other ways. Even if it requires importation, we have to do, because there must be Nigerians first before there will be Nigeria. So he has to crash the prices of food and petrol. When this is brought down, then the next step is a broad-based engagement of all stakeholders as to how, now, what do we do in the long term? Because you have 50% subsidy. So the remaining 50%, government can now be managing it. This, to me, is the ideal thing to do in the interim.
Long term.
In
the short term.
In the long term.
Medium term.
In the medium term, we need to now plan and have an economic blueprint that will now diversify the economy, stimulate production, provide capital to small-scale and medium-scale industries.
But that was part of the promises. The nano businesses will be getting...
No, this is now not promises. We are talking about implementing an immediate blueprint to deal with the situation. The promises had gone the way politicians will always make. They wait for another next time to promise, but we want to deal with the problem on our hands.
Okay, then long term.
In the long term, Nigeria must go back to development plans.
Okay.
We must have national development plans as it were.
Didn't we have one? Is it not just about implementation? We have the 2030 development plan also.
No, these ones are just international financial organization induced theories that is being sold to government, and they carried it along to make promises. There were development plans in 1960 to 1970, and there was also 1970 to 1980. We should have this either 10-year...
We should revisit them now.
Yes.
Okay.
10-year or 5-year development plan where every government, 10-year would be better, so that you have a government running that 8 years, implementing development plan. Another one will have 2 years in it before it will draw its own. That in the long term will set an agenda of industrialization, empowerment, growth, and launching Nigeria on the path of progress.
Thank you very much, Barrister Solomon Dalong, launching Nigeria on the path of genuine development trajectory. Thank you very much for coming on the show. We appreciate your informed perspectives.
Thank you very much for allowing me to lead my voice.
On behalf of our guest viewers, that's a wrap on today's package. We sincerely hope you found the conversation engaging and informative. And be sure to join Daily Politics Live, airing every weekday, and also on special package on Friday, during which we open our telephone lines for you to comment on national issues. Once again, I'm Shapiro Suleiman. Many thanks for staying with us.